The avoidant person is carrying regret about what they did to you that is far more profound and far more consuming than they typically experience about their relationship patterns or their treatment of previous partners. This regret is not the mild discomfort of wishing things had gone differently or the passing nostalgia of remembering good times. This is deep, persistent, painful regret that touches every aspect of their current life and that forces them to confront truths about themselves they would prefer to avoid. They regret specific actions and specific choices, how they withdrew when you needed presence, how they were cold when you offered warmth, how they criticized you to create distance, how they made you feel like your needs were too much when your needs were normal and reasonable, how they pushed you away when you were trying to love them, how they ended things or created the distance that made ending inevitable when you were trying to build something meaningful. They regret the moments they can now see clearly, were opportunities to choose differently, to show up better, to work through their fear instead of running from it. Moments they cannot reclaim or redo no matter how much they wish they could. They regret not just the loss of the relationship, but the specific ways they hurt you in the process, the pain they caused to someone who didn't deserve it, the damage they inflicted on someone who was trying to care for them. This regret is consuming them in ways that affect their daily life, their self-perception, their ability to move forward, because they cannot escape the recognition that they had something valuable and they destroyed it through their own patterns, that they hurt someone innocent through their own dysfunction, that they made catastrophic mistakes that cannot be undone. The regret is real, and it is deep, and it is changing how they see themselves and their choices in fundamental ways. But as real as their regret is, as much as they wish they could undo what they did, as painful as it is for them to carry this recognition of their mistakes, their regret alone does not fix what they broke, does not restore what was lost, and does not mean that reconciliation is possible or wise. The specific actions they regret most. The avoidant person's regret is not general or abstract, but is focused on specific actions they took and specific moments where they can now see they made wrong choices, where they hurt you in ways they wish they hadn't, where they let their patterns control them instead of choosing differently. Understanding these specific regrets reveals both what they're recognizing about their behavior and the depth of their awareness of how they harmed you. The avoidant deeply regrets the times they withdrew when you needed them most, when you were vulnerable or struggling, and their response was to create distance instead of offering support. They remember specific instances when you shared something painful from your past and they responded with emotional distance or dismissiveness instead of with the compassion and presence you needed when you were going through difficulty, and they made themselves unavailable instead of being there for you. When you reached for connection during hard times and they pulled away because your need felt overwhelming to them. They can see now that these withdrawals communicated abandonment at moments when you most needed to feel that someone was there for you, that their defensive patterns hurt you at your most vulnerable moments. This regret is particularly painful because they recognize they responded to your vulnerability with exactly the kind of abandonment that created their own wounds, that they repeated with you the patterns that hurt them, that they became the abandoning person instead of being the safe person you needed. The avoidant deeply regrets how they made you feel, like you were too much, like your needs were excessive or burdensome, when in reality your needs were normal relationship needs that any healthy partner would want to meet. They remember telling you that you were too emotional, too needy, too demanding. They remember making you feel like asking for quality time or emotional presence or commitment was asking for too much. They remember their exasperation or their coldness when you expressed needs that should have been welcome in healthy relationship. They can see now that your needs weren't too much, their capacity was too small, Their availability was too limited. Their fear was too controlling. They regret making you question yourself and your needs, making you feel like you were the problem when the problem was their inability to handle normal intimacy. This regret carries shame because they recognize they gaslit you into doubting your own reasonable needs, that they made you feel defective for wanting what you deserved. The avoidant deeply regrets specific cruel or dismissive things they said during their defensive episodes, words they used to create distance or to hurt you in ways that would push you away. They remember criticisms they leveled at you that were designed to make you feel inadequate or to justify their withdrawal. They remember moments when they were cold or cutting when you were being vulnerable. They remember dismissing your feelings or your concerns as overreactions. They remember specific insults or harsh judgments they expressed when they were feeling trapped or when they were manufacturing reasons to end things. These words are haunting them now because they can see how these words hurt you, how they damaged your trust and your sense of safety with them, how they were weapons they used against someone who was trying to love them. The regret about specific cruel words is intense because words cannot be unsaid, because they know those words are part of what you remember, part of what changed how you see them and whether you can trust them. The avoidant deeply regrets how they treated your vulnerability and your openness as weakness or burden instead of as gift and trust. You shared yourself with them, your fears, your hopes, your wounds, your dreams. You were emotionally available and emotionally generous. You trusted them with your tender parts, and their response was often to treat this vulnerability as problem to manage rather than as precious offering to honor. They minimized your feelings. They changed the subject when you were being vulnerable. They created distance when you were opening up. They made your emotional availability feel like liability rather than like the strength and the courage it actually was. They regret this now because they recognize that your vulnerability was trust, that you were giving them access to your inner world, that you were offering intimacy that most people cannot or will not offer, and that their response was to reject this gift because they were too defended to receive it. The avoidant deeply regrets how they took you for granted, assuming you would always be there, treating your presence and your care as something they could access when convenient, rather than as precious gift that required honoring and reciprocation. They expected you to be patient with their patterns indefinitely. They assumed you would tolerate their inconsistency without limit. They believed you would wait for them while they worked through their ambivalence on their timeline. They didn't appreciate the effort you were making, the patience you were showing, the understanding you were offering. They treated your extraordinary qualities as ordinary or as entitlements, rather than recognizing how rare it is to find someone who sees them clearly and still chooses to stay. They regret this taking for granted because they recognize now that they should have treasured what you offered, should have worked to deserve your patience and care, should have recognized they had something special that required effort and appreciation to maintain. The avoidant deeply regrets the push-pull dynamic they created, the hot and cold behavior that kept you in constant state of uncertainty and anxiety. They remember pulling close and creating intimacy, only to suddenly withdraw and create distance. They remember being warm and engaged one day, and cold and distant the next. They remember the pattern of drawing you in and pushing you away that created ongoing instability in the relationship. They can see now how this inconsistency was crazy-making for you, how it prevented you from feeling secure, how it created anxiety and confusion that affected your well-being. They regret not being able to maintain consistency, not being able to show up steadily, creating chaos through their own internal conflict between wanting you and fearing you. This regret is painful because they recognize the pattern hurt you, even though they couldn't control it at the time, that their inability to regulate their own approach, avoidance conflict, created suffering for you. The avoidant deeply regrets how they ended things or how they created the conditions that made ending inevitable, particularly if they did so in ways that were cold or abrupt or that didn't honor what you shared. They regret if they ended things through withdrawal and distance rather than through honest conversation. They regret if they were harsh or dismissive in the ending. They regret if they didn't acknowledge your pain or your efforts. They regret if they made the ending about your inadequacy rather than about their own limitations. They can see now that you deserved better ending if ending was necessary, that you deserved honesty and gentleness and acknowledgement of what the relationship meant, that the way they ended things added unnecessary pain to the already painful reality of loss. This regret is particularly acute because the ending is the last impression, the final action they took, and they recognize they failed to honor you and what you shared, even in that final moment. How their regret manifests. In ways they cannot hide, the avoidant person's regret about what they did to you is not just internal feeling they're experiencing privately, but is manifesting in specific observable ways that they cannot fully control or hide, ways that reveal the depth of their regret to others and sometimes to themselves. Understanding these manifestations reveals how profoundly their regret is affecting them and how it's changing their behavior and their emotional state. The regret manifests in how they talk about you to others, speaking about you with reverence and loss that is uncharacteristic of how they typically discuss ex-partners. Friends and family notice that they talk about you differently, with more respect, more obvious feeling, more visible regret. They might speak about you as the one who got away, or as someone special they lost through their own mistakes. They might recount stories about the relationship with warmth and nostalgia, instead of with the dismissiveness or criticism they often use when discussing previous relationships. They might admit to people close to them that they made terrible mistake, that they didn't treat you right, that they regret how they handled things. This way of speaking about you reveals that you occupy a different place in their emotional landscape than other ex-partners, that their regret about you is significant enough that they cannot maintain their usual defended position of being fine and having made good choices. The regret manifests in their monitoring of your life and their attempts to maintain awareness of how you're doing, checking your social media if they can access it, asking mutual friends about you, keeping track of your activities and your well-being in ways that reveal ongoing preoccupation. This monitoring is compulsive and often makes them feel worse because they see evidence that you're doing well without them, or that you've moved on, or that you're with someone new. But they cannot stop themselves from seeking information about you because they need to know you're okay, because they're carrying guilt about whether they damaged you, because they remain emotionally invested in you in ways they're not invested in other ex-partners. The monitoring reveals that you're still very present in their mind, that they haven't moved on, that their regret keeps them connected to you, even when physical connection has been severed. The regret manifests in how they respond when your name comes up in conversation or when they encounter you in person, showing visible emotional reaction that they cannot fully control. If someone mentions you, they might become noticeably uncomfortable or sad or activated in ways that reveal you're not just another ex, but someone who still affects them deeply. If they see you in person, they might appear nervous or eager or pained in ways that are unusual for their typically controlled emotional presentation. They might try to talk to you or might avoid you entirely, but either response will likely be charged with emotion and with significance that reveals you're not neutral presence for them, but someone who triggers strong feelings they're struggling to manage. The regret manifests in their changed behavior in subsequent relationships or connections, where they're trying to do differently what they did wrong with you where they're consciously attempting to not repeat the patterns that lost them you. They might be more emotionally available with new partners, might communicate more, might be more consistent, all while recognizing that they're capable of these behaviors now, but weren't capable or willing when they were with you. This attempt to do better with others, while recognizing they failed to do better with you, creates additional layer of regret because it confirms that the capacity existed or could be developed, but they didn't develop it in time to keep you. The changed behavior with others reveals that they learned from losing you, that the experience taught them something significant, but this learning came too late to benefit the relationship with you. The regret manifests in their emotional state and their general well-being, which has declined since losing you in ways that are visible to people who know them. They might seem more depressed, more isolated, more cynical about relationships. They might have less joy or less engagement with their life. They might be noticeably struggling in ways they weren't struggling before, or in ways they don't typically struggle when relationships end. Friends might notice they're not bouncing back the way they usually do, that this loss is affecting them more profoundly and more persistently. This visible decline in well-being reveals that losing you has had real impact on their life quality, that their regret is not just emotional discomfort, but is affecting their overall functioning and happiness. The regret manifests in their inability to fully invest in new relationships or connections, because everyone is compared to you and found wanting. They might date others, but without genuine investment. They might go through motions of new relationship, but without the emotional presence or the hope they had with you. They might end new connections quickly, because the people don't compare to what they had with you. This pattern of failed or shallow connections, after you reveals that you set standard, they're not finding elsewhere. That what you offered was rare enough that they cannot simply replace you with someone else. That their regret includes recognition that they lost something irreplaceable. The regret manifests in their attempts to reach out to you or to maintain some form of connection. Attempts that reveal they cannot fully let you go, even when letting go would be healthier for both of you. They might send messages on your birthday or on anniversary of significant dates. They might reach out with excuses to talk to you. They might suggest staying friends or meeting up to talk. These attempts reveal that their regret creates desire to maintain some access to you, some possibility of connection, some way of easing the discomfort of complete loss. The reaching out is often ineffective or unwelcome, but the fact that they keep trying reveals the depth of their regret and their inability to fully accept that they've lost you. Why? Their regret is real, but still changes nothing. The avoidant person's regret about what they did to you is genuine, deep, and painful for them. But as real as this regret is, it does not change the fundamental realities that make reconciliation unlikely to succeed, or that make their regret insufficient to repair the damage they caused. Understanding why real regret is still inadequate reveals both the limitations of regret without change capacity and the importance of protecting yourself from being moved by their regret to make choices that don't serve your well-being. Their regret is real, but changes nothing, because regret is emotional response to recognizing mistakes, not behavioral capacity to not repeat those mistakes. The avoidant feels terrible about how they treated you. They wish they had done differently. They recognize they hurt you in ways you didn't deserve. All of this is real feeling and real recognition. But feeling regret and wishing they'd done better doesn't mean they've developed the capacity to actually do better. Capacity requires therapeutic work to address attachment wounds, practice developing new responses to intimacy anxiety, building skills for emotional presence and communication. Regret alone doesn't create this capacity. The same person who deeply regrets pushing you away is still the person who pushes people away when intimacy triggers their fear. Their patterns haven't changed just because they regret their consequences. Their regret is real, but changes nothing because it's motivated by loss and by consequences, rather than by genuine readiness for the vulnerability that relationship with you would require. They regret losing you. They regret the pain of their current loneliness. They regret watching you thrive without them. They regret that others don't compare to you. But this regret about consequences is different from regret that motivates genuine transformation. If you were to take them back, if the loss were reversed, their regret would likely diminish, and their patterns would likely reassert themselves because the consequences that created the regret would be removed. The regret is about what they lost, not about genuine desire to do the uncomfortable work that being different would require. This means the regret, while real, is not sufficient foundation for sustainable change. Their regret is real, but changes nothing because the trust they broke through their patterns cannot be restored simply because they regret breaking it. You learn through painful experience that they withdraw when things get close, that they cannot maintain consistency, that their words don't always align with their actions, that they prioritize their comfort over the relationship's health. Even if they regret all of this, even if they promise to do better, you have legitimate reasons not to trust these promises. Trust requires demonstration over time, requires consistent different behavior, requires proof that patterns have actually changed. Their regret is just words and feelings. Trust requires action and consistency and time, none of which regret alone provides. Their regret is real, but changes nothing because you've moved forward in your own healing and growth in ways that mean returning to them would require abandoning the progress you've made. You've healed from the relationship. You've developed stronger boundaries. You've raised your standards for what you'll accept. You've possibly found healthier connections. Going back to someone whose regret exists, but whose capacity is still questionable, would mean risking all of this progress, would mean potentially re-experiencing the patterns that hurt you, would mean accepting less than you now know you deserve. Their regret doesn't change the fact that you've outgrown the dynamic and that returning would be moving backward rather than forward. Their regret is real, but changes nothing because the specific damage they cause to your heart and your trust will affect you regardless of whether they regret causing it. You were hurt by their behavior. You developed wounds that require healing. You learned to protect yourself in ways that make you less open than you were before they hurt you. Their regret doesn't undo this damage. Their wishing they hadn't hurt you doesn't unhurt you. The consequences of their actions exist in you, regardless of their feelings about those actions. Your healing is your work to do and is not dependent on their regret or their apologies or their changed behavior. Their regret is real, but changes nothing because regret without amends is incomplete, and meaningful amends would require changed behavior over time that they likely cannot sustain. Real amends isn't just saying I'm sorry or expressing regret. Real amends is demonstrating through consistent change behavior over extended period that you've learned and grown and won't repeat the harmful patterns. The avoidant might be capable of expressing regret, but sustaining the change behavior that would constitute real amends is different order of magnitude of difficulty. Most avoidants cannot maintain this consistency even when they genuinely want to, even when their regret is real, because their patterns are deeply embedded and their capacity is limited. Their regret is real, but changes nothing, because you deserve better than being with someone who had to lose you to recognize your value, who couldn't appreciate what you offered while you were offering it, who needed the pain of consequences to motivate their regret. You deserve someone who recognizes your worth while you're present, who treats you well from the beginning, who doesn't need to lose you to understand they should have treated you better. The avoidance regret, however genuine, came too late. The time to choose differently was when they had you, and they made the choices they made based on their patterns and their fears. Their belated regret doesn't obligate you to give them another chance or to sacrifice your well-being to ease their discomfort about the consequences of their choices. What their regret means for you in your healing. The avoidant person's genuine regret about what they did to you has implications for your own healing process and your own forward movement. Understanding what their regret means and what it doesn't mean helps you process the relationship's ending and make choices that serve your well-being rather than being pulled back into dynamics that hurt you. Their regret means that what happened between you was real and significant, that you weren't imagining the connection or the potential, that your investment wasn't foolish or one-sided. Sometimes when relationships with avoidance end, you're left questioning whether anything was real, whether they ever cared, whether you completely misjudged the situation. The fact that they regret losing you confirms that the connection was real, that you mattered to them, that what you offered had genuine value that they recognized, even if they couldn't receive it appropriately. This validation can be healing because it confirms your reality and your perception, confirms that you weren't wrong to invest or to believe there was something genuine happening. But their regret doesn't mean you should take them back or give them another chance without clear evidence of sustained changed capacity. Regret is not the same as transformation. Feeling bad about hurting you is not the same as developing ability to not hurt you. Their regret might make you feel sympathy for them or might create hope that they've changed, but you must base your decisions on evidence rather than on hope or sympathy. Unless they've done significant therapeutic work, unless they can demonstrate consistent change behavior over a meaningful period of time, unless they've developed new capacity and not just new awareness, their regret is insufficient reason to risk being hurt again. Their regret means that you can release any guilt or responsibility you might have been carrying about the relationship's failure. If they regret what they did, it confirms that the problems were primarily about their patterns and their behavior, rather than about your inadequacy or your excessive needs. You can release the narrative that you were too much or too needy, or that you failed to be understanding enough. Their regret is implicit acknowledgement that you didn't cause the relationship's failure through your flaws, but that their patterns and their inability to show up destroyed something that could have worked. This can free you from self-blame and can help you move forward with confidence in your worth. Their regret doesn't obligate you to forgive them or to ease their discomfort about what they did. Their regret is theirs to carry. It's consequence of their choices and their patterns. While forgiveness might be part of your healing process, that forgiveness is for your benefit, not for theirs. And it doesn't require you to tell them you forgive them or to maintain contact with them or to help them feel better about what they did. You can forgive internally while maintaining firm boundaries. You can acknowledge their regret while refusing to engage with it. Your healing doesn't require you to manage their emotions or to absolve them of the weight of their regret. Their regret means you had real impact on them and that they'll carry the memory of what they lost, which can be satisfying in the sense of knowing your significance, but should not be confused with having power to change them or with them deserving access to you. You change them in the sense that they'll never forget you. They'll compare others to you. They'll recognize what they lost. But changing someone's awareness is different from changing someone's capacity. Their recognition of what they lost doesn't give them claim on you, or right to return or ability to be different if you did allow them back. Ultimately, their regret is their burden to carry and their lesson to learn from, but it's not your responsibility to resolve or your opportunity to waste. Their regret confirms that you are valuable, that what you offered was real and rare, that they made mistake in how they treated you. This confirmation can support your healing by validating your worth and your reality. But their regret doesn't change the fundamental truth that they hurt you, that they lack demonstrated capacity to show up differently, that you've moved forward in your healing in ways that serving yourself requires maintaining. You can acknowledge their regret exists while also acknowledging that it's insufficient to change the realities that make reconciliation unwise. You can feel compassion for their suffering while protecting yourself from being pulled back into patterns that caused your own suffering. Their regret is real, but your well-being is more important than their comfort, and your healing requires you to move forward into relationships with people who have capacity to show up for you from the beginning, rather than people who develop regret only after they've lost you.